Here's a riddle for you. When is a duct system not made of ducts? In this 3-lesson mini-series, we'll continue advancing your AeroSeal product knowledge with a close look at one of the biggest challenges many dealers run into, sealing building cavity return systems. What is a building cavity return? It's when hollow wall and floor cavities were used to carry return air. When you look into the return inlet opening, you see wood studs, wood joists, and the backside of drywall. This was simply never a good idea and is now banned in current building codes. They usually can be sealed significantly, if not perfectly, but it's complicated. AeroSeal is a technology that seals ducts. Wall and floor cavities used to carry return air are not true ducts. So many have the misconception that AeroSeal won't ever seal building cavity return systems. This is not so. Dealers do successfully tackle them every day all across the country. However, there are technical challenges and related sales communication and client expectation challenges that you need to be aware of and plan ahead for. We'll cover both in this mini-series. Although I will touch on some Sunbelt examples, these 3 lessons will be of the most value to those dealers who run into a lot of complex building cavity returns, especially the classic frost belt basement style house that has multiple returns. Nonetheless, I recommend all dealers watch these 3 lessons to deepen your overall understanding of what AeroSeal can and cannot do. I also recommend that your AeroSeal technicians watch these 3 lessons, and to be sure both the sales and the installation teams are on the same page. So let's get to it. First, some background. In pretty much all homes, the supply side that delivers conditioned air is hard ducted, meaning there is actual ductwork running from the equipment all the way to the supply register or diffuser. It's been a code requirement since forever to contain that conditioned supply air in actual duct materials, like sheet metal, flex duct, or ductboard. In the past, in some markets, the return sides were also almost always hard ducted as well. However, until recently, most codes allowed the builders to instead use the hollow wall and floor cavities to return the ambient temperature house air back to the equipment for either some or practically all of the return system. Now, some have the misconception that return side leaks inside the house don't matter. True for some, but not for many. Many of these return leaks, both small and large, inadvertently draw dirty, hot or cold, humid or dry air from the attic, crawl spaces, or in the outside walls. This causes higher utility bills, poor humidity control, poor air circulation, dust, and unhealthy indoor air. Remember that if just 10% of the return air is sucked down from a hot, humid attic, it will drop the efficiency and output of an air conditioner by an astounding 30%. So, new home building codes in most markets now prohibit using building cavity returns. New home returns must be hard ducted using actual duct materials. Unfortunately, if you're a retrofit contractor, you have to be able to deal with the last 100+ years of return side messes. Now, some building cavity returns are pretty simple to fix. The minimum is when we see just a small amount of wood and sheetrock in some returns, usually right behind the return grill, where perhaps a return can and ductwork then take over. Usually easy to seal. If the leaks are too big for AeroSeal, reaching through the opening for a bit of hand sealing will usually do the trick. Another common one in the Sunbelt and in some condos and apartments up in the frost belt is when return grills feed into an open box cavity under an upflow furnace or air handler sitting on a plywood platform, in a closet or in a garage. These tend to be readily sealable, either by hand or with AeroSeal. Over the years, I've crawled into many of these and sealed them up with mastic and ductboard. Another style is a large building cavity chase behind the grill that carries the air up or down to horizontal equipment in the attic or crawl space. AeroSeal can work on these as well, or if the gaps are too large, the chase can be lined with ductboard or thermopan cardboard. AeroSeal dealers either hand seal these or they mechanically attach the damming and then inject AeroSeal to seal the remaining cracks. Some AeroSeal dealers will price their jobs to just include fixing these when they run into them. Others have an add-on on their price list. Alternatively, the chase type return can often be upgraded to actual ductwork at an additional charge. One approach is to drop new ductwork down the original large chase. So those large box or chase examples are usually fixable. When building cavity returns cause more significant challenges is when they are very extensive and you can't get into them. Instead of large chases, multiple stud cavities and floor joists were used. The very toughest building cavity return systems to seal are the ones in crawl space and basement country where there are multiple return grills, often one in each room except kitchens and baths. These return air inlet grills connect to hollow, narrow stud wall cavities and pan floor joists, which then connect to some sheet metal trunks and drops or a return plenum before connecting to the HVAC equipment. It's this overall building cavity return layout that we'll be focusing on for the rest of this mini-series. I'll use a lot of basement examples, however the basic same issues apply when the layout has the ductwork and equipment in a crawl space, and sometimes it's even reversed and the equipment's up in the attic. There's no question that compared to sealing actual ductwork, sealing panned wall and floor cavities can sometimes be a real challenge to both seal and to price properly. The biggest reason is simply that building cavities inherently leak a lot more than a similar amount of actual ductwork. Because of the many return inlets, the return side of these systems is usually quite extensive. Combined with the way that they're put together, the result is always a ton of what I call smallish leaks. Every running foot of the drywall to vertical wood studs, and the horizontal top plates leaks a bit. Holes for the electrical wiring are routinely drilled through the wood studs and joists, up, down, and sideways. There are larger but still aerosealable gaps around plumbing pipes or even supply ducts that pass through the wood or the end caps or panning. There are big gaps where the sheet metal trunks and panning connect to the joist cavities. And then there's lots of aerosealable gaps and seams in the metal ductwork in the basement itself. Now, AeroSeal can usually seal these leaks, the smallish ones, since they are under the recommended 5/8 of an inch across. And it can seal larger gaps when the injection is let to continue longer. This return side seal certificate is a good example of a very successful seal on a 5-ton system in a 10-year-old Midwestern basement style house. The pre-seal test measured 918 CFMs of return leakage, equal to a 173 square inch hole. That's a lot of leakage, yet is quite typical for this kind of layout. The crew did some pre-sealing by hand, focusing on the bigger accessible gaps in the basement area. The pre-sealing reduced the leakage down to about 750 CFMs. That shows up on the graph as this steep drop in the first minute. It was actually over an hour of pre-sealing done in between the initial pre-seal test and when sealant started getting injected. They then let the machine do its thing for the next 75 minutes. They stopped at 11 CFMs, equal to a 2-inch hole, for a very impressive 98.7% reduction in return side leakage. This is a great example of a straightforward building cavity return project that only had lots of little leaks. So the good news is that if the leakage is made up only of small cracks, gaps, and holes, even if there's a lot of them, AeroSeal can be amazingly successful. Let's take a short review and discussion break, and when we come back, I'll share some not so good news. Now for some not so good news. These projects always are a lot of work. To do both the supply and return side and the typical basement style house usually takes a 2-person crew an entire day. In most homes, in addition to the many small gaps and cracks, there are much bigger holes also, openings that are considerably larger than what AeroSeal can possibly seal on its own. In the basement, it's common to find large holes drilled through the pan joists for plumbing. Also, in the basement, it's not uncommon to discover missing end caps on joist bays, which are either never installed, have fallen out, or have been yanked out by the cable guy. This hole is about 9 inches high by 14 inches wide. AeroSeal will not seal it, and mastic or duct tape will not seal it either. Now, if you can get to big leaks like plumbing holes or missing end caps, they're readily fixable during the pre-sealing stage as part of the standard scope of work. But if the basement ceiling has been completely drywalled over, you have a challenge. So these jobs usually require a fair bit of hand pre-sealing before injecting AeroSeal, using a wide range of different products. While the hand sealing normally focuses on the accessible holes that are too big for AeroSeal to seal, most crews also seal some of the smaller gaps in the basement return ductwork to help the AeroSeal machine work faster and create less overspray. The AeroSeal sealant injection time for the return portion of the job is usually double or triple the normal time for the ducted supply side. Return side injection time is typically over an hour, often an hour and a half, and some even 2 hours. And that's after an hour or more of pre-sealing. The amount of resulting sealant overspray that needs to be controlled by scrubbing and ventilation is much greater than when sealing the supply side. The material cost of AeroSeal sealant, as well as mastic, caulking, canned foam, solid blocking materials, is also much greater than ducted systems. While some supply systems will seal up using less than 1/4 of a gallon of sealant, many dealers have injected over 2 gallons into a building cavity return. Higher average consumables costs needs to be considered in your pricing. Finally, there can sometimes be large hidden holes that can't be easily accessed to hand seal, and that AeroSeal cannot seal either. These were usually made during construction and are now covered with drywall, and result in very large amounts of inaccessible leakage. It's beyond the scope of this sales course to go into all the strange things we run into hidden in the guts of the house. Our AeroSeal technical trainers can help you there, and I'm also available to do private training from my 40 years of home performance work. When there's lots of hidden leakage, the seal is usually partially successful. The leakage rate does come down, but then the graph flatlines at a pretty high level, indicating there is still one or more large inaccessible hidden leaks. And finally, if there are large inaccessible holes, there are some times when it's just not possible to achieve the 10 Pascal minimum pressure needed to start sealing. Now there are workarounds, as we'll get to in part 2, but it is a hassle. And if the hidden leaks are massive, it still may not be possible to start the sealant injection. Now, if the big hidden leaks can be pinpointed, it usually requires cutting into drywall ceilings or plywood floors to get at them and fix them. This requires more skill than some crews have, and more expense and disruption, which not every homeowner will agree to. It is not always possible to readily figure out where the large hidden holes actually are either. As a result, sometimes it turns out that getting them sealed perfectly may be just more work than is worthwhile. All these technical challenges inherently cause sales and client expectation and work scope definition challenges. The fundamental sales challenge is this. While some of the catastrophic holes do get flagged during a basic inspection before quoting a price, most of the time they only come to light after the crew has done the pre-seal test and has been working on the project for many hours. This is kind of like what happens when a roofer contracts to put new shingles on, but finds some rotten roof sheathing halfway through the job. And they can see storm clouds on the horizon. So, in conclusion for today, the 4 biggest challenges with complex building cavity returns are 1. The time, higher technician skill level, and material costs that building cavity return seal projects take in comparison to hard ducted returns. 2. The inherent unpredictability of whether a standard AeroSeal scope of work will be able to make a significant difference. 3. Controlling client expectations, preparing them for the possibility of not getting the ideal outcome on the return side. Or, if they want to get the best possible results, that a change order and some additional investment might be needed. Basically, you have to be careful with your promises and know how to communicate in a way so as to not get blamed for unforeseen issues their home might have that only can become known during the job. And the 4th challenge is simply ensuring they're happy at the end of the job, that we get paid in full for both the standard scope of work plus anything extra the client chooses to get done if it is needed. In part 2, we will dive into more detail on the advanced process your technical team will need to follow when tackling building cavity returns. Then in part 3, I'll pull it all together and share some sales and communication tactics that will make sealing building cavity return systems a viable business proposition. We'll see you then.